the topics we're going to cover today is we're going to first start with the tips and tools for building a form. We're then going to go through the infrastructure of iFormBuilder. Now, if you've been using the platform for a while now, some of the stuff that I'm saying may be common knowledge to you, but for those of you who need that reminder, or maybe there's something small that you never noticed before, even if you have been using the platform for a while, we're just going to go step by step through that. And as we go through it, we're going to do a basic form using the best practices. So we're going to build one up, and then we'll show you an example at the end. So to start it off with our tools and tips for building a form, you always need to keep in mind the device that the end user is going to use. So that first thing is, if they are going to be using a tablet or an iPad, it won't matter so much how much text you have as far as in the elements and in a select list, which is a type of option list. But when you have those smaller devices, you don't want to have tons and tons of text. So that's one of the first things you need to keep in mind, as well as the device type. Right now, we have some features that are not supported in the Android, but they will start to be there will be more features later on. But as we started with an iOS, we have, of course, more with the iOS. So on this help desk article in the announcement section of the knowledge base, under the Getting Started, in the facts, we have the supported features, and there's a huge list of all of the input types, as well as what is supported within the iOS and what is supported within the Android. So that second tip for you is to create a naming convention to help organize your forms. If you're not the only form builder and you're bringing other people in, the form building can get very confusing and your forms can be all over the place. So by building a naming convention in the very beginning, you're able to locate what forms stay together, especially if you're having subforms and multiple subforms, or if you're using the Smart Table Search and you have a database. This is just a way to connect it. So in this example, you can see I have Barrett's form and then Barrett's form food child. The food would be the subform, and the child is saying that that is the subform. And then there's multiple subforms to the parent, and so that just continues with Barrett's form travel, Barrett's form hotel stay, child. So all of those are connected, and once in the form builder, you can actually locate them a lot faster and see that connection. So that's very helpful as far as, again, to organize it for yourself, to see what forms go together, as well as if other people are building forms, they're able to see all the forms that are tied together. The next tip is to create a copy of a form instead of building a new one if it has a similar structure. This is just a time saver. So when you're in the form builder, you'll see the copy form section right there. And if you want to, if you plan on copying a form, it's just important to keep in mind that once you do copy a form, it will give you a little warning, and from there it'll produce a new copy or a new form with that with the table name as something like here we have Mendy subform aggregation images _ child 1. So when you create the copy form, it'll automatically just put a number at the end of that to separate the two. So that's just to keep in mind if you do plan to copy, and you can edit that so it doesn't have that number at the end. But I just wanted to show you what it automatically does. And then our next tool is just a tip as well, is if you're using one option list for multiple forms, just remember that if you edit it in one form, it changes in all the forms. So if for some reason you needed to take a member off of this list, but you didn't need to take them off another list, just copy that data and then create a new form, and you can change it as much as you want there, but it won't mess up the other forms that have been assigned that option list. And then we have one of the go-to things that I do when I'm building forms is I use multiple windows within my web servers. So here's just an example. I have 3 different tabs open that are all iFormBuilder. One would be the parent form, and then these two would be subforms. And that's, again, just so that I can jump to and from and to see the flow on the form building side, as well as once I get more advanced within the forms, I may need to call into the subform and the parent form if I'm doing subform aggregation. And by having the multiple tabs open, that's really helpful to do that. And lastly, create, test, make changes, test, make changes, view data, have others test it, and then assign it out to the end user. There have been so many times that we get help desk tickets where people haven't tested it before they've assigned it to the end user. And while the end user's out in the field, they run into multiple problems that could have been avoided if the form had been tested prior to it being assigned out in the field. The other thing to do is by making the changes and then viewing the data, you're able to see are the elements or input properties that you chose to be in that form, are they showing you exactly what you want to see in the data? And maybe if you're not the person who's actually viewing the data, have someone else on your team look at that and to make sure that it's meeting all the requirements that you need. It's also important to have other people test before you assign it, because depending on, maybe you haven't cleaned the local database on your form, and so it seems to be working fine on yours, but if you open, if someone else opens it, they may see another problem because they don't have all the cache that you've had on your device. So have other people look at it, use other devices to test it, maybe view it on the iPad and on the iPhone, just so that you have a clear image of how it's going to work before it's actually out in the field. I know that may be asking a lot because you don't have tons and tons of time to do this, but by doing these little things, it'll cut down so much on the error and the work later on. So off of that, we have our form building golden rules. That first one we just talked about, which is test before going live. The second one is to have unique data column names that are database friendly. This is within the comment section, and we'll be talking about this in a few minutes, but it's very important to understand what that means and how to troubleshoot it if you do have a data column name that is not database friendly. If you want more details on what data column names are not database friendly, we do have help desk articles that will give you more details on that and have a list of just all of the terms that we're aware of right now, at least, that are not database friendly. And there are multiple times that I'm building a form and I just run into this error where it's not database friendly. So it's really easy to fix, but it's just knowing how to do that. The third form building golden rules is to do not change an input type, data size, or encryption for an element on a live form. It will delete all the data that has been collected. So that's very important. If there's ever a time that you want to no longer use an element, but you don't want to lose any of the data and that form was live, you can just disable that form or disable that element, and that's within the input properties. Again, I have it circled down here, and just check off that box, and with that will no longer collect any type of data, but it will also not lose any data that's been previously collected. If there's also a time that maybe for that form you may not want that element right now, but you may want it down the road, this is another example of why you'd want to just disable it. All right, so I'm going to just give you 30 seconds. I know that you have the option to write down questions in the chat as I go through, but just based off of everything that we just talked about so far, if you want to write down some quick questions, and then I'll continue in about 15 more seconds. So I'll give you a 15-second break.
Hi, Barrett. There's a question that just came in terms of clarifying item 4. Can you
Sure.
just go back to that last slide there? So, and I think this was the only slide that you had a number 4 on.
Yes.
Right. Right. So, and if you want to go on to that, basically, if you delete a an element name on a live form, it's going to drop the entire data column from the data. Now, that said, you're going to be making backups of your data. You're going to, be extracting your data. But at the same time, if you're making modifications to a live form by selecting disabled, it still keeps the data column name intact or the data column intact. The data will still be there, except now when you disable it, it won't appear to new data collectors, or it won't appear on the form as new data collectors are collecting that information. So that was the one of the questions that came in. Sorry about that, Barry.
Sure.
Go for it.
No, perfect. I'm glad. Ryan, if that happens anymore, just again, when we get to those question slides, that's the perfect time to break it up and ask.
Great.
All right, so the next thing I want us to start looking at, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this slide a little bit smaller so that we can jump back and forth between the platform as well as the slides. So it's understanding, we're going to start with this infrastructure that I was talking about earlier. This first part, and I'm sure you're familiar with it if you've been building forms, is under our form builder. It always opens up to a list of all the forms that you have. And of course, I only have a small amount here, but don't worry, I have tons other places. But this is just to show, again, here's some naming conventions. So I have training and user version 1, training and user subform 1 version 1, and then the iOS hospital inventory parent and iOS hospital inventory equipment child. So that's another example of just the naming convention, how it can be used and how it's helpful within your forms. But on this form builder home, basically, you have the option to either load a form, copy a form, or create a new form. Today we're just going to create a new form, and it's going to bring us to our Edit Form Properties page. And in this Edit Form Properties page, let's build our new form. So again, the form label is what I see and what the end user will see. And the table name is how it will be viewed within the Form Builder platform, as well as if I'm ever going to add functionality, I may need to call to the parent form or the child form, and this is where that name is located. Usually I uncheck the based on label name, and this is again so that I can create a naming convention. So today, let's build a form, and we'll call it Barrett's Form Demo for February 2014. And for my table name, maybe I want to, maybe I have the naming convention I'm using, I have it by location and then the parent name. So maybe I'll just have it Barrett Demo and then February 2014 underscore parent. Now, right now, I'm just putting parent in just because I know that we're going to build a form that has subforms. Even if I wasn't sure if I was going to have subforms or anything, I always just add parent. Who knows if down the road I'll want to add anything after. So that's just why I keep that there. And then from down here, I can choose to add a description. Now, the description is just for people on my team to see. The end user is actually not going to see this. So for my description, I'll just say this is a demo form. Moving on, these are the form icons. These are what are located on your device when you're looking at the folder view, or if you have a phone, it'll be a list view. But this is what the visual cue or visual aid that you'll see on there. Now, if I wanted to build my own, I could go and get a public URL and then copy that and paste that in the URL under the form icon. And what this is doing is when the end user sees this specific form, they'll have that image on it instead of one of the images that I can choose from up here. So after the URL, we have the reference ID section. Reference ID 1, 3, and 5, I barely look at. Now, if you're somebody who wants to use iForm Kiosk or is currently using iForm Kiosk, or if you're using the Zebra printer, you're going to be using some of these. The reference IDs that I do look at are reference ID 2 and reference ID 4. Reference ID 2 is, the way I think about it is reference ID 2, it's all about the view. So it's a quirky little thing that helps me remember that in reference ID, if I want to organize what is shown on the records or what fields are shown on a record of a subform, then that's what I've put. I put display field equals, and then whatever number element that I want displayed, I'll place there. So again, that's an example I chose to have here on the slide. You can see those 3 fields, and we have questions, question 1, and then element 2. Those are the 3 fields that I chose to be displayed. The second one is for reference ID 4. And that's to override the device setting of the delete on upload for the individual form. Now what I'm talking about with device setting is on your tablet, on your iPad or iPod or iPhone or Android phone, you always have the app or you always have the settings within your device. So on there, a lot of times users can choose if they want a record to delete on upload or if they don't want it to delete on upload. And if you want to override whatever they choose, these are the codes that you would use, and you would place that in the reference ID 4. The next section is the sort order. As you can see, this always defaults to 0. The reason you'd want to change that is if you wanted your forms to go in a specific order on the device. So if I don't touch it, the newest form will always be the last form that I see on the device. But if I decide to put in, to go through all the forms that are being assigned to users and everything, and I put numbers in, then that's how they'll be shown within the device. So maybe you want it to be alphabetically. You'll have to manually go in and put in from 0 up in the order that you want it to be shown to the end user. Again, it doesn't really matter to me, the sort order, but if that's something that you're interested in, that's how you do it. Next, the label icons URL. What you'll do there is if you're using Dropbox and you want to bring in some forms from forms into your option list, you'll put that link in here. You can actually see when you scroll over, you can see a quick definition of what to do for that. We do have more help desk articles on that if you're interested. But that's simply what you would use that area for. And lastly, we have our page level JavaScript. If you're familiar with JavaScript, then this part will be easy for you, and it's just if you want a variable to be used throughout a form, this is where you would place it. You also have at the end, or at the bottom, it says save, delete, or cancel. We're just going to save to continue. All right, so now we have our form and we have nothing in there. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new input. Now, if you are on your computer right now and you want to follow along, of course, feel free to do so. And if you have questions, of course, feel free to ask. So the first thing we have to keep in mind after we've added an element is what the comment is. That's the first section we usually fill out. So the label is what the end user is going to see and what I'm going to see, whereas the data column name is what I'll use for functionality as well as what needs to be database friendly. So just for an example, maybe I want a location here, and I have it checked off based on label. Now I'm pretty sure that this is not database friendly, so I'm going to go ahead and try to save, and it gives me this error message that says data column name location is not allowed. So what I have to do is I have to refresh my page. And this is again how I was talking about troubleshooting if that happens. And I'm going to go into the USA Barrett demo and I'm going to load form. I'll add my new input again. I'll say location. But this time I'm going to uncheck the based on label. I'm going to put location of user. I'm going to save it, And as you can see, I was able to save it very quickly. Now let's go ahead and add another input, and for this one we'll just call it name. And as you can see, the location, it defaulted to text as well as name. So as you continue to add elements, it'll always default to a text input property. If I want to change that, I go under input property, and we have numerous amounts of inputs. And once we go over here, here's a giant list of all of them. And it does go in order, and we're constantly adding more of these, and we have details on each of these within the help desk. But for this specific form, you know, it's important to keep in mind the elements we've created so far, which is location and name. So most likely for our text, we don't want, for our location, we do not want a text element. So I can actually use a location for that, and that'll grab the GPS or grab the information of where that user is at that moment that they're taking the form. But just to go back, so the assign to, I just want to give you examples of how these forms can be used, or how these input properties can be used. The assign to is wonderful if you are completing a form, or if there's one person who's completing the form and then they need to have somebody else fill out part of that form, you can assign to that user. So by adding the assign to in there, it'll give you, on your device, you'll see a list of all the users that are in the form. So that's perfect if you have to fill out a section and they have to fill out a section. The next one is divider. The divider is great, and it's an aesthetic. It helps break up the information and break up your form so that you don't have tons and tons and tons of input properties without a break. The image, this allows the user to take a picture with their device, and you can add a setting so that the user has to take a picture and they can't use an image that's already already located within that phone or device. So it has to be a brand new picture. So there is a way to manage that. The location is what we just used for that, and again, that's grabbing wherever that user is. The multi-select is a type of option list. We'll go into more detail once we start talking about what each option list is. But just to continue a little bit more, we have our QR code or reference ID. The select, again, is a type of option list. And then the text and the text area, the difference between those two, if you just have, like I used here for a user's name, then you just want to use a text element. If you want them to be documenting maybe a paragraph or more of information, then you'd want to use a text area. So let's continue, and as we go through it, I'll be showing you more input properties and bringing them in. But this is just a quick overview of all of them that are available to you. So one thing, when you're looking in the input properties, and we briefly talked about the disabled button, that's right here. There's also the required button. That means that the user can only save it unless that field's done. Once that field is done, if it's made required, then they're able to submit it. If they do not complete a section that is required, then they will not be able to submit the data to you. The read-only, and you can see here, we do have a read-only input type, and we also have that read-only text box. And the checkbox is great when you want to use it, like I said here, when dynamically populating a large amount of text in a text area element, or when using a hard return to dynamically populate a large list in a text area element. Those are two very similar items, but that's the only reason I would see using the checkbox. To tell you the truth, I never use it. A lot of times I will use the read-only element, and this is great when you want to have something pre-populated for the user. So maybe it's the date. You don't want them to be able to input the date, or maybe you don't want them to be able to, you decide to do a smart table search, and you don't want them to be able to edit any of that information. then you could create a read-only, and they can, like it says, they can read it, but they can't edit any of that. So this element is great when you're adding functionality within the smart controls. All right, any questions? Ryan, how you doing over there?
Sorry, Barrett, I was sitting on mute there. No, we have quite a few questions coming in. They're being fielded on the side. A couple of the questions were around, do we use, is it a best practice to use autosave? Is there any value in using autosave? And can you set the time limit that the autosave is being used? The simple response is the autosave is there for as a convenience. I personally don't use it because after every element or so, I'm clicking the save button just to make sure that everything is database friendly and able to go forward. The other question there, you're not allowed to, or we don't have a feature just yet to allow you to set the time limit for when the auto save is going to occur. I had another question if you're able to create folders within the form builder. That's a question or a comment that comes up quite a bit. It's something that's being considered in a redesign of the form builder. However, the naming conventions that Barrett went through really allows you to build your own folder structure. I don't know how many of you use a Mac, but it's also the same way that you're able to create the folders and the folder structure without actually having a pre-built folder structure in there. So outside of that, just a reminder, this is being recorded. We will be uploading it and sharing it within the next 24 to 36 hours for you to revisit. If there's any other questions, please keep them coming through the questions tab, and we'll go from there.
Sure, thanks, Ryan. And just to reiterate that, on the autosave, I never have that checked off. And I don't think any of the iFormBuilder agents have that checked off. And again, that's just because we want to know right away if a data column name is not database friendly. So that allows us, if we're saving after one or two elements, then it tells us right away that we're not database friendly. All right, so just to continue, we have, so far, we only have our 2 elements, and we actually don't want to have our name as read only. So let's put in, we'll just put a text element for that again. But let's also add an option list. So with that, we're first going to, after we've added a new input, we're going to go up to our label and change that. For this, let's say, let's make it very simple. And are you enjoying this training? So for that, I could have the user input yes or no, but that's not really going to help me right now. So I'm going to go ahead and just make this into a select in the option list or in my input properties. When it is an option list, it will take that form, and as you'll see, I'll try to save it, and it'll tell me I did not. Oh, it should tell me I didn't choose an option list, but I guess I didn't. So I'm going to go down to the option list manager. And for my question, I could use one that was already created, the yes or the no, or I can add a new one. So if I add a new one, it'll go right on top and I'll say hashtag my option list. I'll click on that and I'll just create the option list name. And keep in mind when you're creating this option list name that it needs to be something that is very clear on where it is and maybe what form it belongs to. So I might say Barrett demo training, and hopefully that'll help me know that it's a yes or no question. So I'll have yes, no, or NA. So this is just very basic, and I'm going to save it and take it and then assign the list to the element. So that was the select. What the differences are right here in this little graph that I made for you, and hopefully it's helpful to see. But the three different types of option lists that you can make are the select, the pick list, and the multi-select. The select is what we just made, and it almost forms a long row of buttons. So usually I only use this if I have up to 3 options. So here, yes, no, or non-applicable is very simple, very easy, and it's not taking up much real estate within the form. Now, if I decided to have a question like yes, no, non-applicable, and then some other options, then I wouldn't necessarily want to do select, because then the text would run together, it would not look good, and I'd most likely have more errors by the users. So for that, I'd want to use a pick list. The pick list, it opens up into a little small window, and it'll show however many element options you have there, but they can only choose one option. And the last one is the multi-select. It looks exactly the same as a pick list, except the user can choose more than one option. The multi-select is great when you want to have simply that they just select more than one. The pick list is great when you want to add functionality. Maybe you have an other option and you want that text area to only show up if they choose other. You can do that with the multi-select, but it is easier to do that with the pick list. And again, just a reminder that whenever you edit these pick lists, you're editing it for every single form, or whenever you edit these option lists, you're editing it for every single form that they've been assigned to. Oops. All right, so now that we've created a select, let's also create this as a pick list. So instead of making it making a brand new, adding a new element, I'm just going to duplicate that input and go into the common and I'm going to uncheck that for the based on label, and I'm just going to go pick list, or just pick. And then input properties and change this one to pick list. So now you can see the difference between the two. So I'm going to save again. And we'll do one more so you can see the multi-select. That's the basic of our pick lists and option lists. But if you want to add more functionality to do a smart option list, I'll go through that in a little bit later, but it is very simple to do. Oops. Let's actually just want to duplicate the one before. And then we're going to change that and uncheck the based on the label and change this to multi, because this one will be multi-select. Input properties, just jumped right over that before, sorry about that. So multi-select and save. Now, as you may have noticed, I didn't check off any of these fields as required so far. If I do want the name required, it's very easy. I can just check it off there, and it has a little star at the end. While I'm building a form, I never actually check off required, just because as I go through and I test it, it makes it a little bit more difficult to keep going in and out of it if I have required fields. So one of the last steps I actually do is, once the form's been tested by myself and others, that's when I go back and I add the required fields. All right, so the next thing is with your form, you're going to have subforms. Again, you use that naming convention that we've talked about, and that's the same example that I had before. To understand what subforms are and smart paging is it's really, if you think of a tree, your trunk is that parent, and each branch is just a different version of, or a different child form. So here again, we have the Barrett's form parent, that's right there, and then we have the Barrett's form food child would be maybe child 1, and then Barrett's form travel child would be child 2, and then Barrett's form hotel stay child would be child 3. So those all 3 are different subforms. If you ever wanted to go really crazy and just add more subforms, or what we call grandchild forms, so off of child 1 I could have another subform, which I would, like I said, I'd call it a grandchild form. that maybe would go into more detail on whatever the subform was for child 1. When using subforms, though, it's very important to keep in mind what the data looks like. So here, let me just make this a little bit bigger. Here is what, with an XLS feed example, what you'll get. The parent form will all be on the front, on that first tab. And then the following tabs, as you see here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are all the child forms. So all the data from the child form will be viewed on a different tab within that XLS feed. So that's just important to know, and make sure that you know when you're looking at your data and you're trying to view it and understand how the feeds work, the subforms are separate than the parent form right now. What also is important to understand is the single versus multiple link mode, as well as on-page table view versus separate table view. So here's an example of what it looks like on the device. The link mode, when you're in the smart paging, and I'll show you that in a second, but you'll have the option to have either single or multiple. Now, what single means is that in this subform, I'm only allowing you to take one record. So you can only take one record using that subform. Now, if say you're doing an inventory and you are going to see multiple pieces of equipment. Now, that's a case where you'd want to use a multiple link mode. By doing that, every piece of equipment you could have a different record for. So instead of having to continue to build multiple versions of something or the same fields over and over again, by having it in a subform, you're saying, okay, these 3 fields need to be completed for every piece of equipment that you see, and the user will be able to make the multiple records by pressing that plus button right in the corner, and that's the difference between the single versus multiple. In the single version, they wouldn't be able to add anymore. So here on the left-hand side, you have this first row right here is the subform single record on a page view. So when the user clicks on that subform, they're able to make that single record, and this is where they'll be able to see it on that parent page. And here's an example of what a subform multiple record on the page view. So here you can see when they press that plus button, they're able to create multiple records, and you're able to see all of those on the parent form. Now, if you were to check this box that said separate table view, this is what you would see. So even if you just had one single record, then maybe it would just be that first one, then it would still be on a different view than the parent page. I know this sounds kind of confusing, but as you go through it and you're able to look at it a little bit better, you're able to decide and see what it is that works best for you. At the bottom here is just another example where you have the subform single record on a separate table view, and that means that here we have those 3 records, and on the parent form it'll say that 3 records were taken. And that's just the difference between the on the form and the separate table view. So again, just to reiterate and hopefully not confuse you anymore, this top part right here is what it looks like on the parent form if you do not have that separate table view checked off. This bottom part is what it looks like on the parent form if you do have that separate table view checked off. So the biggest difference is you can't see any parts of the record if you have that checked off. All right, so moving on, after the smart paging and the subforms, you have the smart controls. This is just a quick overview. We're not going to be going into smart controls at all today, but just to show you, the dynamic value is you'll use the basic JavaScript, and you'll say within that you'll want the function that applied to cause an action. So that's what you'll place in the dynamic value. If you want maybe you don't want something to be viewed, or you only want to view it if something, one action has taken place, and you'll place that in the dynamic value. The dynamic label is used to change the label text of an element. The client validation is saying that this value must be true for a particular element to pass validation. And lastly, the validation message is what will show up if that particular element from the client validation does not pass. So any questions? I know we're going through a lot and we have a lot to talk about, so hopefully I haven't lost any of you. And Ryan, field any questions if you have some.
Barrett, it seems like everybody's pretty content right now in terms of questions. I know that the subform, or not the subforms, the smart controls are a big part of advanced form building. Definitely stick around for our next session when that comes up. I think we're good to go. Doesn't seem like there's any new comments. Thanks.
Sure. So the next thing I want to just go over is the thought process when you're starting a new form. Hopefully your brain doesn't look as chaotic as mine does, but this is really what I go through every time I've been given a specific need or a paper form. I look at it and I go, well, with this, how and where can I cut down on human error? What element types can I use so that in the end I have exactly what I want? I don't have point values that are incorrect, or the user forgot to put something in, or they put text in when it was supposed to be a number. So how can I cut down on that human error? The next question is, what input properties should I use for each element? Again, if maybe that's just as simple as, do I use a select option list, or do I use a pick list option list? And again, if I have more than 3 options, then I'm most likely going to use a pick list option list. If I have less than that, then I'll use the select. Another thought is, are there going to be subforms, and where do I split up the data into the different subforms? So if I don't have a paper form yet, I only have an idea that someone has, I'll actually jot it down in Microsoft or Notepad and write through what questions are going to be there, and trying to segment what way is best for the user, the workflow, as well as, if I'm going to have the user put in images, do I really want the user to be putting in images on the parent form, or do I want to create a subform that is just for images so that that parent form is clean cut and concise and gives me all the basic information that I need? The next thought is, what devices are they using? Going back to what we talked about earlier, depending on if they're using an Android or iOS, depends on what elements that I can use within the form that I create. And lastly, what should the data look like? What is the end goal, and where will this data be used, and how do they want to view it as well? So just for an example, this was given to me a couple days ago, and it's just, they had a basic form, and these are just the pieces that they wanted in it. And what I did is I took that information, and basically I went through that thought process that I just talked about with you, and I built this form. Let me go through that with you. I'm going to open that up. And as you can see, this would be the parent form. I do have a child form as well. But let's match up. So we have that name, and I just kept that as a text element. And then the date, I created that as a date and time. I also changed the based on label for date of report. Yeah, and I'll show you what this looks like on the device after, so you can see really how these input properties influence the flow of this form. And just to give you a little sneak peek of what we'll be going through on our next training section with the smart controls, if you move down into the smart controls, I put new date for that date element, and what that's doing is that's going to pre-populate that field with what the time and date is when I currently open the form. Otherwise, the user can go in there and change it if they want, but this way they can see that it's already taking in all the information for them right at that moment. But but I still give them the opportunity to change that. Next, I added the email input property. And if you haven't used this before, it's wonderful to use and makes people's lives easier if they understand how it works. So under the input property, I just select email, but I'm not done once I do that. I then go down to my option list, and I actually select an option list with the ending of iFormBuilder.com or Gmail, Yahoo, or AOL.com. So what you'll see when we go through this is then the user just has to input the first part of their email address, and then it can be formulated. They can just end up choosing one of these for the end part. So it's less typing on their part, and again, cutting down on human error. Next, I decided to put a divider in. One thing that I did, and I use this a lot, and I highly suggest it, is within the dividers, I number them. So this was the first divider I had, so I called it div1. Now if I go down to the reference ID section, I put an element skip report, and what that does is if I did not put that in, that would be within all the PDF reports and everything else, and I don't need that a part of it. This isn't collecting any data at all. So by placing element skip report in the reference ID for that element, then I don't have to worry about it taking up any real estate or taking up any of that information that I really want on my report. The next thing I did is here we have the hospital. Well, they had, for this example, they had the room type underneath in the equipment inventory, and I didn't think that made much sense as far as the workflow and as well as for what is best for the end user. So I created an option list with the hospital names. So again, to cut down on human error, it's just a pick list so that they don't have to worry about typing it up. And from there, I also made a room number, but I didn't just put in tons of numbers. I actually created this into a smart option list. So if this is something that you're interested in doing, it's very, very simple. I go into the advanced section of my option list manager, and for the conditional value, I went in and I took the data column name that was used for the hospital name, and I placed in that data column name equals 0. So what that means is from numbers 100 to 105, that will only show up if they choose that first option or that first hospital. So here, if they choose Reston Hospital Center, then numbers 100 through 105 will show up. And I continue to do that, so that second hospital name, that could be, I don't remember what the exact name is, but I went from 200 to 205 for that second one. And the third one would be 300 to 305, and the fourth one would be 400 to 405. And just a reminder, you always have to start with 0 here. So again, this was to create that. I went and I took the data column name from the hospital pick list. I just copied that, and then I went down to the room number, and I went into the option list manager, and then advanced, and I placed that data column name here, and then I had equals 0, and then went up in numbers from there. So it's very simple to do that, and you'll see again once I show you on the device what it looks like. It basically just, based off of what that user chose for the hospital name, is what then is going to pre-populate that second list for the hospital number. Moving on, I saw on the list they had their equipment inventory. Instead of having that all in the parent form, I decided to make that into a subform. So what I did, of course, I went through and I added my label, and then I went into the input properties and I chose subform. From subform, I went down to smart paging, And here in Subform, you can see all the forms that have been created. You can attach any form that's ever been created, and I chose to do the iOS Hospital Inventory Equipment Child. I also decided to have that as multiple, so that, like we talked earlier, if they're going into multiple rooms or they want to get the equipment inventory for multiple pieces of equipment, I want to make sure it's multiple, and they just press that plus sign, or they just press the element again to create more records. I also chose to just have that on the same table view. So this means that on that parent form, I can see a quick list of all the pieces of equipment that have been taken inventory for that parent form. And up here, this is actually this is the subform. So like I said earlier, I always have my multiple tabs. This was our parent form, and here's my subform. And this is just to meet all those requirements for that inventory. I have, the piece of equipment, the ID number. So even though I put that as a text element, the reason I did that is a lot of times, with barcodes, or maybe not barcodes, but sometimes you'll see it, you'll have like Z125, B127, things like that. And if I just had number, then the user wouldn't be able to put any of those letters in. Moving on, for that equipment inventory, they wanted an image of the equipment. So here, all I did is I created again, made my label and made my data column name, went down to the input properties and chose the image input, and that was it for that. And lastly, for notes, I just did the same thing and made that a text area. So I'm assuming that they're going to have multiple pieces of notes for each thing, and that's why I include it as a text area and not a text element. And going back to the parent form, was everything up to code? And I did make this into a select because it's just going to be a yes or a no. I also added some functionality to say if they chose no, then show this text box. And very quickly, I just did that by putting it in the conditional value, because like I said earlier, the conditional value is all about the view. So if they select yes, then nothing will show up. But if they select no, then I call up to this option list and say only show this if they select no. And lastly, I have the send form to, and that's the assign to element that we talked about earlier. So after I've completed my part and after I've signed it, I can assign it to one of my colleagues, and then maybe they can add some more pieces of equipment in that subform. So now I'm going to actually open it up and show you what it looks like on the device. So here's the image that I added. So I didn't use one of those form images that came with iFormBuilder, but I added that URL, and that's what it looks like. You also see that the subform is still assigned here, so the iOS Hospital Inventory. If I go under the form assignment, I can unassign that so I don't see it. But it just to keep in mind, when you are form building, it'll automatically assign every form that you create to you in your device. So let's go into this. Oops. All right, so here for the username, I actually changed that, and I forgot to tell you that. So within iFormBuilder, we have some built-in functions. And so for the name, it's just iFormBuilder.username, and it pre-populates that username with whatever they signed in with. So I signed in with Train Barrett, so pre-populated that area with Train Barrett. Then with the date, as you can see, that's the time right now. And that goes with that conditional value that we did with the new date, so that it shows exactly what it is now. Then my email, this is the email widget, so maybe I'll just put that in to show you what that looks like. And I'll just click done. the hospital name. This is for that smart option list that I was telling you about. So for Fair Oaks Hospital, if I did this correctly, the room numbers should be in the 300s, so perfectly. Now let's say I meant to choose Reston Hospital. Then I go there and it's in the 100s. So that's how you do that smart option list. Now here's our room inventory subform. So maybe let's just go with TV and just put some numbers and letters in. We can take a quick picture so you can see what it looks like. I'm just going to take a picture of my screen. I know that's not very exciting. I probably should have taken a picture of myself, but I decided not to. So there we go. Notes, thanks, and then just done. All right, so that was on, for that subform you can see down there, that was on the same page. And now maybe I have another piece of equipment, so I'll tap that again. I'm just going to put nonsense in, press done. And again, you can see those within that parent form. Down here, here's our select widget. Was everything up to code? Yes. Okay, that's great. If I click no, then I get that text area that says what wasn't up to code. So yes, and then no, and then there's more detail. We'll just say the room. And then send form to. I only have, this form has only been assigned to me, so I can only send it to myself. But if this form was assigned to other people, then everybody this form was assigned to, I would be able to share it with and assign it there. And then sign here. And that's the form. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see my corner, but it says an image was added to my Dropbox. So I have, and it also tells me that new records have been assigned to me. So with adding that new images, that could be that I just, because my Dropbox is linked up to my form builder, then I'm able to get all the images that are taken on that form would then be brought over to my Dropbox. All right, so we're coming close to an end. Before I really go into any questions, I just want to let you know, just a quick review, what we talked about today. We did our tips and the tools for the form building. We talked about the infrastructure of iFormBuilder. I gave you the example of building a basic form using best practices. Just to let you know, we have just about our next upcoming training webinars. We do these on the last Wednesday of every month. So on March 26th from 4 to 5, it is creating smart forms. So we briefly touched today upon the smart controls, and we actually made a smart option list, but to really jump in there and do more with the smart controls and make a smart table lookup, I highly suggest that you attend that training. Following that one is the improving your data with third-party integrations, and that's on April 30th. If you're wondering what the third-party integrations are, then this is just briefly 3 of them that we work with is Zapier, Clipfolio, and WebMerge. If you read our latest newsletter, it talked about making your data dance, and this is that same idea. It works with XML and JSON Post with iFormBuilder, and it really helps you customize your data reports with visual graphs, and if you want some elements in your reports, or if you want some elements filled out by the user but you don't want it in the report, then you can get that through the third-party integration with some of these, as well as by doing this, you add an automated workflow. So in the end, even though it doesn't take too long and it's not too hard to set up using some of these third-party integrations, but it's really worth it because once you have it set up once, you don't have to go back into it since it's already automated. And lastly with that, you have an easier and better consumption of data collected. After this, if you still have questions or at any point, I just want to make sure you guys know that we're there for you, and here are some of the ways that you can contact us besides just through email. We do have our Customer Success Center. We're always improving that and adding and changing that. So stop into the knowledge base and submit a ticket if you have any questions there. Take part in some of the forums, and as well as add some comments to some of the help desk articles. If you find them confusing, most likely someone else finds them confusing. So just keep adding content to that. Another one is the Let's Chat feature. If you've been into our website lately, you see that little orange box that pops up and says, let's chat. Well, during the day, we have iFormBuilder agents who are there and ready to help you and assist you. And by taking part in the Let's Chat instead of submitting a ticket, you're more apt to get faster answers and get your workflow moving a little quicker. The other option is with implementation support. You may have some left over from before, or if you want to purchase it, that's 4 hours that can be purchased, and that can be used to help you set up your forms. That can be used to help you set up your workflow, as well as if you're trying to get some other members up to speed, you can use some of that time for that. If you have a dedicated database and you haven't taken part in our Kickstart program yet, you do have that available to you. That's 4 hours, and that's individual time that's focused on your need and your company's need to progress and to create a wonderful structure for your dedicated database and make it so that it's organized and it's I wouldn't say headache proof, but almost headache proof. So we'll help you manage that and add the different profiles and go into more advanced form building specific to what your need is, and we'll teach you how to build those aspects of the form. And lastly, we have the iFormBuilder training. That can be done on site or it can be done remotely, and that if you're interested in that, you can contact us, and we would love to answer any questions about that. So if you have any other questions, you can email the training at zerionsoftware.com. We also ask that you complete our feedback form, and I'll put that link in the chat, and that will just let us know what we could have done better. So at this time, if you have any questions, Ryan, I'll hand it back to you and be happy to answer any questions people have.
Sorry about that. I was just talking to myself for a little bit. No, so some of the questions that came up here are, is there a maximum number of options that are available in the option list? And the answer there is we have customers that have a few thousand to a few like tens of thousands of options. The thing is to keep in mind is the how many columns, how many rows are you really dealing with there? Also, there's better ways to break that down. The smart option list is one of those examples. Depending on what your workflow is, really will dictate the best strategy for going about that. That's definitely something that we'd love to help with or work with. The other thing I wanted to address is I had a question earlier about how do you link your Dropbox. Now, what Dropbox integration is it basically allows you to back up any media that is captured with iFormBuilder, and the media will automatically be downloaded to your local Dropbox. So I'm including here in the to the entire audience just a link to all of our Zendesk article on how to link that Dropbox. And then finally, I think Barrett just dropped in all the details about the how to contact training and how to get in touch with us. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, we're here to help. It's really a testament to see how many people joined us for this Form Building 101. If we can help in anything from a strategy for building a form to workflow enhancement to leveraging the APIs, please don't hesitate to reach out. There's some pretty amazing things happening with the platform. Just a matter of making sure you know what you need to know. So thank you again for joining, and Barrett, thank you again for a great presentation. We'll be sending out a link to the video. Please share that with any of your colleagues, or if there's any dedicated training that needs to happen, we'd be more than happy to help there as well. And with that, Barrett, do you have any other closing remarks?
No, I just appreciate everyone taking the time to come to this. And Ryan, if you could just copy and paste the feedback into the chat. I'm not sure if everyone gets that or if I just send that to you.
Yes, I'll include that on our email out, and we'll go from there. With that, I'm going to end this session, and I really look forward to work with each and every one of you. Thanks so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.